Hello, and welcome to the State of European Tech. I'm Sarah Guemouri.
And I'm Tom Wehmeier, and this is the 10th edition of our annual report into all things tech in Europe. We've come a long way from that original slide deck that kicked it all off all those years ago.
Yes, and in so many ways. The European tech ecosystem has changed massively over the past decade. Our annual report provides a deep dive on the health indicators of the European tech industry, and this 10th anniversary edition is a very special one for us. We're taking a look back not only at 2024, but at the last decade, as well as what's to come in the future.
Perspective's never been so important. Anybody working in technology or a related industry would say the last decade has been transformational for our ecosystem. From talent to capital to company building, the developments are vast. Yet despite all of the progress, this year has been one of dispiriting headlines. A year of political and regulatory turmoil, with concerns over the EU's AI Act. The challenges identified by that report by Mario Draghi into European competitiveness, and Europe's ability to support breakthrough companies to commercialization and scale. All of this set against the ever-present unflattering comparisons to the US. Yes, we all know Apple is worth more than the entire European tech ecosystem. So it's a paradox that requires some scrutiny. How do we know what the real story is? And should we be optimistic about Europe's progress? Our aim is to bring you some perspective and to back this up with data in bite-sized form. 10 things you need to know to navigate European tech today.
And as always, we couldn't do this alone. The State of European Tech is brought to you by Atomico with Auric, HSBC Innovation Banking, AWS, and Slosh, as well as the many data partners who help bring this report to life. There are 3 core pillars any ecosystem needs to thrive and innovate: talent, capital, and mindset. Over the past decade, Europe's ability to attract and grow talent, unlock capital, and raise our ambition level has been transformed. We've built a world-class talent pool. There are 3.5 million people working in European tech today. That's over 2.5 million jobs created since 2015. It's growing at a 24% compounded annual growth rate, which is the same pace as the US. Our pool of capital invested in companies has increased 10 times in 10 years, enabling this talent to thrive. 426 billion in total funding has been invested in Europe in the last decade, versus 43 billion in the decade before that. To put this in perspective, in 2024, we're on track to invest 45 billion. So in 1 year, we'll match the amount invested in a whole decade.
And there's been a clear shift in mindset. There's a greater public understanding of entrepreneurship, of the attractiveness of the startup career path, and more ambition. Most experienced founders say public perception of entrepreneurship has improved, and that really shows in the number of people pursuing careers in the sector. There are 7 times as many people working in venture-backed companies today in Europe compared to 2015. The most ambitious founders starting out today don't dream of building a billion-dollar company. They aspire to grow to 100 times that scale. And with this change in mindset, we're seeing more companies, more ambitious ideas, built to solve harder problems. Founders are upping their game. The overall universe of companies has grown 4.7 times in the last decade, including 35,000 early-stage companies, 8 times more growth-stage companies in Europe over the decade, and $358 billion breakout companies.
This has given Europe world-class returns and a growing track record of exits. We've scaled valuable firms across sectors and across the breadth of the continent. We now demonstrate essential repeatability as the flywheel of talent takes skills and capital from one growth success to a new generation of firms. Cumulatively, we've seen close to $1 trillion in realized value from IPOs and M&As over the past 10 years. Take Arm's $160 billion market cap, or Adyen and Wise blockbuster listings. A decade ago, this scale of outcome was unimaginable. It's a huge step forward, and it comes from humble beginnings. Just think about where today's far more robust pipeline of new startups could take us. Europe is allocating its resources to sectors with the potential to solve huge societal problems, from renewable energy to carbon removal and preventative care. We're building technology to solve the needs of future generations. In 2024, 21% of all funding raised in Europe went to companies related to sustainability. That's double the ratio for the US, which sits at 11%. And we're showing leadership in a number of clusters. Over the past decade, over $30 billion AI companies have emerged. Global leaders in Europe have spanned from a variety of sectors. The State of European Tech respondents called out $77 billion Spotify and $45 billion Revolut as the biggest European success stories from the last decade. And there's so many more. Klarna, Adyen, UiPath, ASML, Celonis, and Arm further prove the versatility of Europe's tech leadership, from fintech to SaaS to chip makers to computing and AI. It's important we acknowledge these huge successes. These companies are, sure, not as valuable or as ubiquitous as NVIDIA or OpenAI. It's true. But we're in danger of failing to celebrate the likes of the $300 billion ASML for that comparison. It's an unproductive mindset to fall into.
We've been talking a lot about mindset today because despite this incredible progress over the long term, there's real concern across the ecosystem about the way forward today. We have more new founders than anywhere else in the world, yet questions are starting to be asked about Europe's attractiveness as a place to start and then scale a tech company, especially by our most ambitious talent. We asked thousands of you about what could stand in the way of Europe's potential. From founders to talent to investors, there are widespread frustrations about the continued challenges we all face when it comes to regulation, bureaucracy, capital, and scaling across a still fragmented European market. There are real fears that these challenges could erode the future success the ecosystem has set itself up for. We've organized these barriers to success under 6 keys to unlock the future European tech deserves. These span from unlocking capital at scale, to liquidity, to customers, to regulatory dynamism, global talent competitiveness, and commercializing R&D. None of these individually is insurmountable, but bold, positive action is needed. We must support those who are finding new ways to tackle old problems. A great example is the 28th regime, or EU Inc. as it's now sensibly been rebranded, an EU legal framework that would allow businesses to operate finally in a single market. This would scale back bureaucracy and scale up ease of doing business across European borders.
One issue that we would like to highlight today, and which consistently hampers Europe's scale-up ambition, is the growth funding gap. Europe is guilty of focusing too much on its successes and failures by comparison to the US. Yet, one data point we've all been struck by is this. Over the past decade, Europe underfunded its growth companies to the tune of $375 billion, which still doesn't come close to the $1 trillion invested in the US. This is about right-sizing the supply of capital to meet the actual demand from companies started here in Europe in the past decade. It's about adjusting for access to capital, full stop. Normalizing material round size differences and lowering dependence on US source of capital. That's a huge difference. Imagine where Europe will be if we solve this. This is the comparison to the US that we should all be talking about. Investment from pension funds and major insurers provides the beginnings of a solution. European pension funds currently invest just 0.01% of capital into European venture, a rounding error for the $9 trillion of assets that they are managing. Across the continent, movements are being made to address this issue, from the UK's mentioned house reforms to the French TB initiative. Doing so could result in billions more capital available to Europe's scale-ups. That could be the difference between our best and brightest companies scaling from Europe versus being forced to relocate to the Valley. If European tech is to meet the potential that the last decade has set us up for, scale-up capital is going to be essential.
A mantra for the team working on this report is that it's human nature to overestimate what's possible in the short term, but underestimate the long term. Now, while to some degree it's unavoidable, it can be a limiting mindset when it comes to innovation. Technology is about having the resilience and drive to solve incredibly hard problems. The sector, by its very nature, forces us to think many years into the future. If rather than focusing on the scale of opportunity, we're disappointed by the shortcomings of today, how can we have the growth mindset to build for a longer-term future? This mindset is, in our opinion, more so than any of the challenges identified by our survey, the central barrier to Europe's success. If we let our actions be clouded by fear and doubt and led by conservatism, we'll undo the very thing that has been key to our success until now and in the future. So we hope to leave you with some data to inspire you about the way forward and to remind you of this longer-term vision. Here's where Europe can and should be when we bring you the State of European Tech 2034, contributing significantly to our GDP by adding an additional $5 trillion worth of ecosystem value, further strengthening our talent pool and accelerating our impact with an additional 15 million jobs created by Europe's tech companies, and with capital unlocked for scale, keeping the brightest minds in Europe, maintaining their focus on solving our society and economy's hardest problems, and unlocking the first trillion-dollar companies from the region. Europe as a leader, not a follower. Conscious, dynamic, and ambitious, but most of all, unprecedented. A technology superpower for a new generation. Thank you.
Thank you, and see you next year.